So to just introduce the panelists today, I won't go into people's bios in great detail because I think you've already seen those, but joining us from Europe, and yes, she is actually in Europe, so it's the middle of the night there. Thank you for joining us at this hour. We've got Isabel Huther, and she's the Sustainable Investment Analyst for BT Funds Management in New Zealand. So I'm sure she'll be back at some stage back here in New Zealand to talk to us again. And from the CFA Institute in Hong Kong, we've got David von Eiff. He's the Director for Institutional Partnerships and Sustainability. And closer to home, we've got Hamish Reid. He's the Director for Sustainability and Brand for Synlait. So, and then finally, I'd like to give special thanks to our moderator today, Erica Miles. Erica's she is a specialist in responsible investment and corporate sustainability as a consultant for West 9 Consulting. So, you know, some very good skills there we have on the panel, and I'm really looking to hear from you all. Now, with that, I'll hand over to you, Erica.
Thanks for the introduction. I'm really looking forward to the session today. What we're going to unpack is hopefully going to answer some of the key questions or concerns or just some curiosities from members. So what we're going to look at is the frameworks and definitions around responsible investment, which is particularly pertinent given the FMA's research that came out from their review of practices against their integrated financial products guidance note. So looking forward to having some clarity there. We'll have a look at it from responsible investment and look at it from an issuer's perspective. So I'm really looking forward to Hamish's perspectives, what he sees investors doing and what investors should be doing better. And we'll get the wonderful expertise from Isabel about moving the conversation from exclusions to engagement and beyond. So it was Isabel's likes to push us, so and beyond. And then we'll look at whether responsible investment will help investors with the impending climate-related disclosure regime, and also give some little tips on where to go for further information. Just in terms of the Q&A, we do love Q&A. Please don't be shy, and we have a Q&A function for this webinar, so please put your Q&A in through there. There is no chat function for this, but do put in through the Q&A throughout the webinar, and we will ask the questions of the panelists as they come through. So feel free to ask, please not too many hard questions, but since we have such experts on the call, please feel free to give them a stretch. So just before we start, David, just in getting into the nuts and bolts of the session, I think it would be really good if you could help us understand what the CFA defines as responsible investment. And if you could help us understand whether responsible investment is the same thing as ethical investing, or even sustainable investing or sustainability. So how do all those little jingles kind of tie together? If you could help us unpack that, would be great.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for the question. That's actually a really good question, since those are very similar but different terms. So ESG investing is part of a group of approaches that we generally collectively refer to as responsible investment. So while ESG investing is concerned with how ESG issues impact long-term return of assets and securities, other types of responsible investment approaches also take into account non-financial value creation. That's the idea there, is to reflect stakeholder value in your investment strategy. So while all forms of responsible investment, except for engagement, are really related to portfolio construction. Then you get into ethical or value-driven investment, and that refers to investing in line with certain principles. So one example would be faith-based investing. And that approach is often used negative screening to avoid investing in, say, morally objectionable activities, such as companies that have poor human rights or workers' rights records. Sustainable investment refers more to selection of assets that contribute in some way to a sustainable economy. So assets that minimize natural and social resource depletion. So it is a very broad term with a broad range of interpretations that can be used for the consideration of typical ESG issues. So that can include best in class and ESG integration, which considers how ESG issues will impact a security's risk and also its return profile. The term sustainable investment can also be employed to mean a strategy that screens out activities considered contrary to long-term environmental and social sustainability. So that could be coal mining or exploring for oil in Arctic regions, deforestation, etc. So we see it can involve negative screening as well, but not just negative screening or not even always negative screening. So there's no real standard set of criteria for identifying responsible investment. And as a result, there's a wide spectrum of different types of responsible investment that overlap and have evolved over time.
Great, thanks for clarifying, David. It's interesting, the clarification there around responsible investment versus ethical investment. So where would you put, say, investment in alcohol, a company that produces alcohol, where would you put that one?
Me coming from New York, I'd put that under ethical investment, but some people might put that under responsible.
Yeah, I put it under ethical as well. In terms of the ways of tackling responsible investment, you did mention there was a whole spectrum, and I think Kylie's going to share the slide that we have from the Responsible Investment Association of Australasia in terms of that spectrum of responsible investing. I'm just wondering if you could run through that slide for us, David, and what your understanding is of it.
Yep. So as you mentioned, the RIAA has their responsible and ethical investment spectrum that maps out these various approaches and areas for responsible investing and goes over kind of their similarities, differences, and areas of focus. We actually have a similar breakdown within the CFA curriculum that differentiates between sustainable and responsible approaches and social impact. And the Investment Association has also developed their own responsible investment framework in which they acknowledge that fiduciary duty of financial institutions to incorporate climate factors such as long-term action needs to be taken in for the best interest of clients, and that's alongside traditional risk and return needs. So if we look back at the RIA spectrum, some responsible investment approaches are oriented towards managing environmental, social, and governance, or ESG risks, while other approaches are focused more on pursuing ESG opportunities. So at the most basic, you have the ESG integration and negative screening, which we touched on briefly in the first question. And these are mainly aimed at enhancing long-term value by leveraging ESG factors to mitigate risk or identify opportunity. Then you have your norms-based screening, which differs from negative screening. It has some potential benefit to stakeholders as you're aiming to avoid companies that are below some minimum standard based on international practice. And as we move into best-in-class, impact, and sustainably-based investing, we begin to weigh benefit over return. And the goal of these approaches is to have a measurable environmental or social impact with returns expected to be adequate or sub-market. So we can see that while most responsible investing will target market rate financial return, some, especially impact investments, will intentionally deliver a below market rate in order to maximize a social or environmental benefit. The spectrum also highlights the intentionality that different responsible investment strategies demonstrate towards impact, such as whether they focus on avoiding harm to society and the environment, or actively contribute to positive solutions for, say, underserved people or the planet. And as investors move towards the right-hand side of the spectrum, they're increasingly interested in aligning capital with purpose. So in order to capture associated financial returns or have a positive impact by financing solutions to societal challenges.
Just wondering if you could unpack the financial returns aspect. There's quite a lot of concerns that being responsible or being an ethical investor also compromises financial returns. What's your view there?
So they've done some research on that, and obviously the research is kind of all over the place in terms of, does it have a benefit, does it not have a benefit, and each study seems to come to a different conclusion. In Hong Kong here, the HKMA recently did a study looking at two different terms, well, not two terms, but two basic broad sections. One was looking at climate risk and one was looking at transition risk and comparing the different assets in their portfolio. And they found that the companies that were addressing the terms associated with climate and transition risks were performing better than the like browner firms, you could say. So it is still, I think, kind of undecided if ESG will give you a better or subpar return, and it might actually be somewhat regional in that regard.
Great, thanks, David. Just speaking of returns and testing the legitimacy of embracing sustainability, Hamish, from an issuer's perspective, I know that Synlait's been on a sustainability journey. It would be good to understand what that journey was and whether consciously considering ESG has paid off. Has it been worth the effort for you?
Thank you, Erica. Kia ora, people. Thank you for having me. Yes, it has paid off. Let me tell you that story. But first of all, I'm no RI expert, but I've been closely involved with Synlait's sustainability journey. So let me share that, and really looking forward to any questions that might get into some more specifics. But what I'm conscious of is perhaps many of the listeners don't know who we are. We're not exactly a household name, but we are a milk nutrition company that's doing milk differently for a healthier world. We're young, we're fast growing. We serve some of the world's biggest food multinationals like Danone and Nestlé and the A2 Milk Company and others. We're known for thinking and acting differently, for bringing essential nutrition to the world. And we're also known for sustainability, which has been pretty new to us, really. And those conversations started just only in 2017, actually. And that was when our founder, John Penno, was thinking about the first 10 years of Synlait and reflecting forward, actually, what might happen with the business in the 10 years ahead. And you'll know that our industry, the milk industry, is not known for great stewardship of such things as waterways and climate. So he was feeling a whole lot of pressure, of course, from people, rightly so, about the environmental degradation of our industry. And he's also copping a bit about the social impacts that we have. You know, we've grown rapidly, and there's been some really positive social impacts of that, and that we've created a lot of wealth and a lot of jobs, but we also have lots of trucks on the road, dust and noise and all that goes with that sort of stuff. But really, one of the big fundamental drivers in John's mind was the commercial opportunity around doing better on sustainability. And customers like Danone and Nestlé were telling him from 2015, 16 even, that if we were to do better when it comes to environmental and social performance, they would buy more from us and they would pay more for us. So that's what really got his attention, and that's what really drove our pivot, really. And what I think what that comes from, Eric and I have been talking about that in the last couple of weeks, and you know, Nestlé and Danone are being driven by insight that's being mined from their consumer base, and their consumers want to see change. They want to see more sustainable food choices. So when consumers start making demands, businesses re-engineer and act. And then when there's a big enough groundswell of movement of consumers and businesses, then that's when legislators step in and sweep up the laggards. It doesn't sort of happen in the reverse. That's our experience anyway. So in 2017, when I first met John Penno, our founder, he asked me to do three things, and that was to repurpose Synlait, to put sustainability at its centre, to build our strategy for sustainability, and then the key bit, commercialise that. So that's what I've been busy doing over the past 5 years. But when we first kicked off, we really started to realise that business can no longer really be talking about and planning for continuity and perpetuity. The things are radically changing, and we can't be winning in the future in the way that we've won in the past, when every year big chunks of our planet catch on fire and other parts of our planet get swept away in floodwaters. So I think that challenge to commercial power is really existential, actually, and our business in particular is hugely dependent upon natural systems. And there is evidence that every natural system that we depend upon for our business and for life is in rapid decline. And when you look at the global food system, we have done brilliantly over the past 70 years. Since the industrialization of food, we've managed to feed billions more people cheaply, but that's come at a massive cost. You know, we're responsible for 30% of the world's emissions. We use 70% of the world's fresh water. We've been responsible for 30% of the loss of soil, 30% of the loss of biodiversity. You know, we've done a lot of bad things in feeding billions of people cheaply. So, you know, that accumulating damage is the threat that we face. And perhaps that damage isn't so confronting in our little corner of the world, because we're managing our resources reasonably well, but in other parts of the world there's some shockers playing out. I read a report recently that the grain belt in the US, which is so dependent upon nitrogen fertilizers, synthetic fossil fuel based inputs for production, that they may only have 60 harvests left in those soils. And if that part of the world goes out of business, then, you know, we're in deep trouble in terms of our ability to feed the world. So, you know, we really need to rethink, reimagine what's possible. So it's those sorts of insights that we've been building our pivot on. And in 2018, when we launched our strategy, we announced our really bold 10-year targets for our off-farm operations through manufacturing and supply chain, right through to our farm systems. We've got what we call sustainable innovation platforms. There's 12 of them. There's a whole lot of work streams going on underneath each of those. A big chunk of our workforce is really committed and working hard on all of those initiatives under each of those platforms, and we're making really good progress, particularly on climate, for example. I think we're the only business in New Zealand, perhaps in the world, that's managed to drive a 10% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions on farm. Without the breakthrough technology, which is on its way but not here yet, we've just been achieving that by farming smarter. And off farm, our emissions are down 24% on an intensity basis, and on an absolute basis, we're making really good progress towards our 1.5 degree SBTI target by 2028. So we're making really good progress. We've got a long way to go though. Water's still a big challenge. That's a generational issue. But to get to, well, this is a long answer to your question, Erica, but the commercialization part, it's starting to pay off, but we were really conscious that we didn't want to just go and start telling stories to our customers about our success without having runs on the board. So we've got really good runs on the board now. So we're now starting to turn those runs into commercial successes. And late last year, we soft launched our Made with Better Milk program. We're fully launching that later this month. So hopefully you'll begin to see that through LinkedIn and other social mechanisms, where we've built a program which gives our customers, Nestle, Danone, for example, a whole lot of value propositions around sustainability claims. So we can provide them with product, milk powders, for example, that have really strong sustainability credentials built into them. And then that can help them with their brand stories out to consumers. So there's a really nice tie up there. So that overall ambition is all about profiting from...
I'm going to stop you there, Hamish.
Yep, good. Thank you. I was at the end anyway, Erica.
There's two questions up there which are fabulous questions, but I just want to follow on from we will get to those questions. I just want to follow on to Isabel, actually. I'm hearing your points about the consumer demands and indeed the managing the damage, which leads us nicely into the moving on from the exclusions, which is the approach that we started off with in 2016. We'll just exclude companies, to engagement and beyond, as Isabel puts it. So just appreciate from your perspective, Isabel, based on your experience, how important do you see the engagement aspects as we move from exclusions and beyond? And then I will get onto the two questions that have gone into the Q&A chat. Over to you,
so when we look over from where we've started off with, we've got a fantastic journey ahead of us in terms of what we can achieve in the opportunities, but also we've got challenges that we need to tackle. So from an investor perspective, we also have consumers that are interested in the products that we are offering. And for them to understand what we are doing may be quite challenging, because at the moment what they understand is the exclusionary component. So we've got a lot of questions around fossil fuel exclusions most of the times, but also around human rights abuse, and all these aspects that are very important, and not just important for people's hearts and how they feel about what they invest in, but also important in terms of what they want to see is being achieved in the world. So the research that has come out tells us that customers are interested in products, not just because they want to see them, but also they are customers that feel guilty and want to make sure that what they are investing in is not kind of negating the feeling of conscience that they've got. Moving beyond the approach where we are just excluding components can also be difficult, because it means that we need to communicate that to customers and make them understand what it actually is. And so customers may not understand obviously what we do, because it's not a product that they face every day, like in a supermarket when they go and buy coffee. That is something that they're quite familiar with, but the investment mode, they may not always understand as much in detail. So making the information bit-sized and concise for consumers is really important as well, because we know that not a lot of you and not a lot of consumers in general have a lot of time on their hand. And within sustainability in general, information is either too much for consumers or too little, as in there is no information, or it's not clear, or consumers have to dig through a lot of paperwork to get to what they want to find, and it may be challenging for them. Knowing all of that gives us great opportunity in making sure that we can address those challenges and provide information that is right for the consumers. On the investor side as well, we have done engagement for quite a lot of time now. We've done engagement, and most investors have around the world, with companies, with countries, and we speak to management or others that we are able to engage with around the issues that we think are pertinent. And most of those have been around governance aspects. So as we are moving to the introduction of climate change consideration and modern slavery, not all of us may have the tools and knowledge, and also the ability to identify where that information can be found to ask the right questions. With climate change, for example, we have lots of information also in our private lives that we can draw on, but filtering down and knowing what exactly we need to ask a company may still be a challenge, but we get there. So there's a lot of opportunity in skilling up yourselves and identifying those opportunities, knowing where to find. And I think in New Zealand, we have a great opportunity anyway, because we're a small country, in connecting with each other and ensuring that we can share our learnings. Then also on the investor side, going beyond all of these components to the aspect of where we want to expand our horizon, or kind of tweak it a little bit in investing in opportunities further on the right-hand side of the spectrum that we saw earlier. So best in class, impact investing, all those components. We need to understand what it is that we're doing. We need to understand how to measure it, how to track it, and how to report it. And again, distilling information, there's lots of it out there, in identifying those opportunities, understanding what is the best in class and what of the different perceptions we need to take into account is really, really difficult. And here we have, again, opportunities to learn from those that are the early movers and those that are shaping the journey for others.
Yeah, that's true. And I think that measuring and reporting on sort of non-financial outputs from an investment perspective was one of the very many messages from the FMA in its report last week. A couple of questions for you, Hamish. The first one is, has Synlait ever considered doing any sustainability linked bonds, and I'll add loans to that. Interesting to perceive what the perception of supply and demand is for such assets from an issuer's perspective.
I don't think so. No, I don't think we've considered bonds. We had the first New Zealand ESG linked loan with ANZ and with BNZ, and that's been brilliant. Well, we've achieved our target, which has resulted in a basis points reduction, which has been nice. But one thing that's really done, it's galvanized our finance team around what's possible, and that sustainability can pay. So that's been a great result. I know our CFO of a few years ago did look at bonds, but I think he didn't progress with it and went down the ESG linked loan instead. But yeah, I'm sure that's in the back of their minds.
Great, thanks. There's one other question, sorry, Hamish. What motivated Danone or Nestlé to ask for / incentivise better sustainability from its suppliers?
Sorry, Erica, I missed the very first part of that question. Could you say it again?
So what motivated Danone or Nestlé to ask for or / incentivise better sustainability from its suppliers?
It totally comes down to their consumer demands. So I think, that notion you've probably heard a lot, and that is every day we get to choose the future we want to see by the food and beverages decisions we make every day. It's not just food and beverages, it's everything. But, I think that's really strongly coming through in consumer research, and these consumer focused brands that Nestlé own and Danone own are researching their audiences all the time, and more so they are getting their consumers telling them that they want to have better transparency through the supply chain of the impacts that food has upon people and planet. So Nestlé has acted on that, and they were pretty slow to pick it up, to be honest, but they've gone fast since they started announcing their strategy. It's always been a really core element of Danone's DNA, but Nestlé are really charging with it, and it's starting to come through on their brands now. So Kit Kat, I think in Europe, Isabel, you might be seeing it if you in your journeys up there see a Kit Kat bar, but I think they've now got a stamp on the principal panel that says carbon neutral by 2025 or net carbon zero by 2025. So if we can sell Nestlé low greenhouse gas milk powders that go into making Kit Kat, we can help them on that journey towards their net zero target by 2025. And that's coming through the Carnation brand and lots of other brands. So I think you'll start to see those front panel claims on consumer brands more and more so in the future as those businesses react to demands from their audiences.
Yeah, so primarily consumer driven, if I'm hearing you correctly, Hamish?
Yeah, absolutely. The consumer foods companies are entirely driven by their consumer audiences, and that has been my world for the past 30 years. I've never seen a successful brand launch that has been built on something other than deep consumer insight.
Thank you. Isabel, a question for you coming through. To what extent have New Zealand firms prepared for and or adopted ESG / sustainability principles, which has really changed the investing world in many countries? So this is, how does New Zealand compare to other countries on the ESG front?
Yeah, Moritz, this is a really good question that you're asking. So what we generally find, what we generally find is going from what Hamish has just said, often aspects are consumer driven. So a company has set up a sustainability strategy, not just yesterday, but perhaps 5 or 10 years ago. And they've set it up focusing on the consumer aspect first. And we, the investors, are also interested in it and have increasingly been now for the last, say, 3 to 4 years, where we're wanting to see more aspects that align with also the consideration that we want to sell to our own customers, or make them understand that it's aligned. For us as an investor, alignment is really, really critical. So we often find that a firm one firm may be using one approach, a different firm may be using a different approach. And they may be applying different kind of sets of reporting elements or different sets of criteria when they define their sustainability standard. They may be using a standard, one of the international standards, or they may have defined it themselves. So we often find that quite challenging, because at the end of the day, what we want to provide to our customers is one story that tells the many stories underneath it, and it raises everyone's profile of the companies that we invest in. But also, as an investor, we're wanting to make sure that we use our voice in relaying what the consumer is telling people like Hamish's, Synlait's, or Danone's companies in the same way. So we do have that double power, in a sense, and the ability to enable change, but comparability is important. And in New Zealand, unfortunately, we don't have a taxonomy set up yet as it relates to sustainable investing that we can relate to and that we could ensure that companies report under. Is it necessary to have one? I don't know, and I do not want to go into that debate, because we've got a lot of taxonomies around the world already being built, and we've got an international sustainability standard now being developed, which we could draw on, for example. There are lots of opportunities moving forward as we are seeing more standardization. So I'm just really hoping that we can draw on that and can enable customers to really see the action behind all of that, because that's the important part in making sure that we can see that.
Yeah, I think seeing the results of investment activities in terms of positive environmental and social outcomes is really important. So I'd like to draw on your experience now, David, because you're based in Hong Kong, and so you've got an Asia Pacific view. What improvements are you seeing to responsible investment practices there? And are you seeing, have you got any examples to back that up?
So there are a number of positive trends. I think Isabel mentioned there's a number of taxonomies, so I'll talk about that a bit as well. But there's an increasing number of PRI signatories in Asia, which is great to see. It's about a 20% increase since last year. We've seen Japan release an ESG code of conduct for data providers. China has released their own ESG disclosure standards, and they also continue to work on the Common Ground taxonomy. But we know there are conflicts between the EU taxonomy and the Common Ground taxonomy, particularly around sustainable activities and the China Green Finance taxonomy for including concepts such as do no significant harm and minimum safeguards. And those are just approached very differently in the two taxonomies, so they're still going to have to do a lot of work to work that out. Malaysia and Singapore are responding to global green taxonomy debates by rolling out a series of policies aimed at encouraging both issuers and investors to integrate sustainability factors into their decision-making. South Korea, Taiwan, and India are drawing up more roadmaps towards mandatory reporting of sustainability-related information. China's also been an early adapter of green finance, along with Hong Kong, and that's been expanding its influence within that global central banking body, the Network for the Greening Financial System, and the G20 Sustainable Financial Study Group. The market for sustainable bonds has also been growing, especially in Hong Kong and mainland China. So one good example I think of that is there's a casino operator in Macau, which is I think the Galaxy Entertainment Group, and they've invested about 15.6 million US in biodiversity theme bonds, which are the first of their kind in Asia. And the bonds are aimed at supporting green finance strategies outlined in Macau's 14th five-year plan, and also promoting Macau's green industry and diversification. They've also subscribed to 12 million of SME-themed COVID-19 impact alleviation social bonds, which were issued by the Bank of China Macau in response to the government's call to support SMEs in overcoming the financial challenges during the COVID pandemic. You know, Macau is a very small nation and very reliant on tourism, so the COVID lockdowns have been particularly hard on them. And their investment philosophy in these deals is, I think, pretty progressive, saying that what is taken from the community is to be used for the good of the community. And that includes active support of Macau's diversification efforts. And while we have seen opportunities like these, there are still quite a lot of challenges from an ESG perspective as well. So over the last several decades, there's been a significant level of investment in China. But in recent years, attitudes have shifted significantly, and companies are more concerned about ethical and reputational risks. So we've seen a number of ethical challenges involving high-profile companies like Disney, the NBA, Google, clothing companies especially, for the increase between U.S. and China frictions that's highlighted differences between kind of what's considered democratic and more authoritarian approaches, and in particular the opacity of like the party, state, and business separation in China, and the growing influence of the party over business, the difficulty of monitoring supply chains, et cetera, all make it hard for businesses to know if you're, say, using what would be considered forced labor, for example. So from an ESG perspective, this means that firms are not, need to do a lot more due diligence. They need to increase transparency and are being more careful with, say, sensitive technology. Western companies that take ESG seriously are also considering alternatives outside of China, especially given the growing kind of regulatory, legal, and reputational risks. So in France, for example, the prosecutor's office has opened investigations into 4 different apparel companies, Inditex, which owns Zara, Uniqlo, Skechers, and the SCMP, the owner of Sandro and Muji, have profited from and concealed the crimes against humanity by using Uyghur forced labor. So you've also seen the World Tennis Association reconsidering its justifications for doing business in China. So while there's been a lot of progress, especially around environment, when we come to the S, there's still quite a lot of work to be done.
I'm going to throw the next question at you, David. It's from Shane, and then just given your Asia Pacific view, which is fantastic to have, so thanks you. What do you think about the future of sustainability-linked bonds and loans, and in terms of changes to sustainability / social targets? What would you expect there to be going forward, and how challenging will higher hurdles be on the social side for firms to achieve these targets within the loans?
Okay, you think about that for a second. So I know it's definitely a challenge for APAC in general, because when you think of sustainability linked bonds for a developed country, it's very different than thinking of sustainability linked bonds for a developing country. So if you look at, say, like Sri Lanka, what's a green project for Sri Lanka might not be a very green project outside of those areas. So dealing with setting up green bond frameworks that can work within those local and regional areas is going to be a continuing challenge, especially under local kind of cultural and regulatory frameworks. Hopefully that addresses the question.
I think it does. Yeah, it is. To that with the New Zealand perspective.
I lost you for a second there.
Oh, did you? Isabel, in terms of the New Zealand market for sustainability linked bonds and loans with a social lens, what do you think would be the hurdles there?
From a New Zealand perspective, what we often find when we look at different bonds being issued is we're seeing targets being set, but one of the aspects where things are improving as we speak is the reporting aspect. And we all have been focusing around the world on environmental objectives as a starting point, with the social objectives often taking a bit of a backseat. So we do expect more in that area, in particular as we are moving towards the release of a Modern Slavery Act in New Zealand. That will be a particular area which we all need to get our heads around in terms of what that means, how we can embed it within the consideration as a firm, and therefore in a linked bond that we're wanting to issue. We know diversity is a very, very important agenda, and one that we've been seeing more attention being drawn on for the last 1 or 2 years in particular. And we also know in New Zealand, what's really important is ensuring that we have got fair wages, that we're paying our staff, and through COVID, there has been a highlighted issue. So these aspects we will see more demand on, and we find that they are being asked more, which we find is fantastic. And on top of that, one thing that is not always part of an international conversation when we look at sustainability are cultural aspects. So in New Zealand, we've got a unique opportunity here. We often have firms that have got those considerations embedded in their sustainability approach or their overall integrated approach that they've set. And we can expect more in that aspect.
Great. In terms of, I think the cultural one is really important, Isabel, and I think we need to have a collective conversation about what that means within the investment landscape. This is one of the topics that is currently being mulled over by some within the community. There's a question for you, Hamish, in terms of Synlait's experience and looking at the ability to influence. How easy or difficult has it been for you to engage with farmers on your ESG targets, given how large the Scope 3 emissions tend to be within a company and indeed within the sector? It's a great question, Raoul, by the way.
Thank you, Raoul. Yeah, our Scope 3 emissions are something like 87% of our total climate impact, so it's massive. And we were really nervous about how our target might be received by our farming community, because we basically have made a promise on their behalf. So we set ourselves a target of reducing on-farm emissions by 30% by within 10 years, when we set that target in 2018 out to 2028. And when we announced that, we were really nervous about what kind of a response we might get, but actually it was really positive. I think our farming community had just wanted to see, you know, a target set, and we told them we still don't know exactly how we will get all the way there, but we've made really good progress, and in 3 years we've managed to get a third of the way there, so we're on track. They've been really supportive of our targets, and they're all leaning into it, really committed to it, and they see what we're doing as future-proofing their businesses, because they know that we are serving the likes of Nestle and Danone and others that are really closely connected to consumer insight, and consumers are, as we've talked about, are all demanding this change in the food system. So we're reacting to that, and our farmers are right behind us reacting to it also. So yeah, they see it as a really good future-proofing opportunity for their business. They don't want to be excluded from supplying the likes of those big multinationals if they haven't got a good track record.
Yeah, I think that's a sort of key to getting responsible investing right as well, Hamish, is to have that long-term view and indeed to future-proof your business. And I know one of the key government requirements now is for investors to have these climate statements under the climate-related disclosures bill. And Isabel, in your opinion, how do you see the requirements to look at climate change and indeed looking at the future-proofing of the investments? How do you see that enhancing the practices around responsible investment in New Zealand more broadly? It's a tough question, Isabel.
And a tough question in particular as it's related to reporting, and most of us don't really like reporting. We prefer not to do it. So one of the aspects that is often really important when we consider new approaches or regulations being introduced, there's a bit of an adoption curve that we go through. We have to build processes and systems to capture new data or adopt new regulations within our existing frameworks and ways we operate as companies or as institutions. And it always feels like a lot of pain going through that process. But often that process may help us identify opportunities and challenges. In particular, that climate-related disclosure standard is around reporting. It's not around acting. So when we use that kind of reporting element to perhaps mirror or highlight what we want to do and what we are wanting to achieve in tackling climate change, because we all know, or most of us know anyway, that is an important aspect, and most of us agree that we need to do something about it. When we use that as an opportunity, then I think we're in a good position. In New Zealand, we've got a fantastic climate law that is assisting us and giving us the foundation to build upon and draw upon in terms of what we are wanting to achieve. But it's not easy. None of this is easy. And when that is embedded within an institution or an organization, making sure that that process is not hindering real action can also be challenging. So we know that the climate-related disclosure standard that has been put together is based on the Task Force for Climate-Related Disclosure Framework, which has been around since 2015 and has been improved on. A lot of different jurisdictions around the world and countries are now bringing something very similar into force, and we will see reporting from next year onwards throughout the world. We also have the International Sustainability Standard Board, which has set out the guidance and the consultation for their climate-related considerations as well. And we have got companies that have been reporting under that Task Force for Climate-Related Disclosure framework for quite some time. Now, when we look at the particular regulation that has been brought out in New Zealand, we've got a few metrics, I would say, compared to the amount of metrics that companies and investors need to report to under the EU Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation, the SFDR regulation has come out. It has got, when you look at the reporting template that has been put together, it's got 500 lines. We've got about, it feels, 8 metrics that we need to report on. So I feel we're in a good position here, but of course, in all of that, we should not be losing sight of the real action, and we should be using this as an opportunity to embed action and embed our targets in what we are wanting to achieve in tackling climate change.
Yeah, I agree. It does seem a bit overwhelming, I have to say. And when you look at the reporting template from Europe, it's like 700 and something lines long, and you just go, oh, that's too hard. But that's where the world's moving. David, my friend, I know the CFA has recently developed a certificate in ESG investing, and I do know that the RIAA conference on the 28th of September is also going to cover responsible investing 101, but just wondering if you could run us through sort of what that certificate is and what benefit it would have, and where could people get some more information on that?
Sure.
Please.
So, sure. So, I'm sure you're all familiar with the CFA, and the goal of the CFA has always been to, I think they say, lead the investment profession by promoting high standards of ethics, education, and professional excellence for the benefit of society. So I think from that is where the ESG Cert comes from, right? I know it was developed by our UK society, and the goal was to have it be a qualification made by practitioners for practitioners, as they say. So it's developed to deliver knowledge and skills required by the investment profession to integrate ESG factors into the investment process. It's a self-paced study program. I think they say it's about 130 hours of study if you're very new to it, 80 to 100 hours if you're more familiar. But we've had very good uptake so far. I think we've had 22,000 people globally sign up for it since the UK Society has gotten that started in 2019. And what's interesting is it's not just new people. We've had some very seasoned professionals take it. And what's interesting to me has been like the change in who's taking it, because originally, it was designed for investment professionals. So you saw portfolio managers, analysts, fund managers, but now we're seeing more like ratings agencies, independent directors, even like legal and comms people also being interested, because the goal of that certificate in a way is to create kind of its own common taxonomy, like let you know what ESG terms mean, like responsible investing, sustainable investing, what all the different types are, and kind of get that language and that knowledge. So that's been great to see. In terms of getting more information, we can go to the CFA website and take a read there. But it goes over quite a lot of material. Like you have everything from introduction to ESG, so you have chapters for the E, the S, and the G. Engagement and stewardship has its own section as well. ESG analysts, analysis, values, and integration. Portfolio management is all contained inside the cert as well.
That's great. There's also the, for those of you who aren't aware, there's also the PRI Academy, which used to be run by RIAA, but they sold it to the UN PRI, which has a courses, well, it has a number of different courses. So it has like level 1, 2, and 3, and then it's also got a sort of governance level course as well. We will put out a summary of resources, and I do know that RIAA and the CFA are working on a document to get that common language in terms of the sustainable investing, the responsible investing. So watch the space between RIAA and CFA in terms of getting a common global understanding and language here, which is, I think, a really good starting point when you're kicking off. I'm just conscious of time, and our questions seem to have dried up. So are there any questions from the audience for the last few minutes? Otherwise, I'll pose a tricky one back to Hamish. Well, while the questions come flooding through, Hamish, from an issuer's perspective, what do you see as the opportunities for advancing responsible investment practices in New Zealand?
Well, I think greater visibility of the pull from consumers. I think that we've talked about it before, that my view, everything starts with the end user, the people that part with their money to buy, in our case, food and beverages. And when they're making demands upon their manufacturers, and their manufacturers make demands through the upstream supply chain, which gets to us, and if those companies are substituting poor performers for good performers, then we benefit, and our shareholders benefit, and therefore investment money theoretically should flow to us, shouldn't it? So in my view, that's how it all starts. And it's for those of us that have been working in sustainability for a long time, it's really exciting, because it's all starting to move. It's been so slow, we've been desperately frustrated with the movement in this direction that we all knew had to happen 20 years ago. But really, it's only in the last 5 years that, now I keep talking about Nestle and Danone, but there are many, many others, like Coke and Pepsi and Mars and Procter & Gamble and Unilever. They're all making massive strides in this direction. And those are the companies that reach into billions of consumers all around the world. So they are the ones that are best to respond to consumer demands, which I think will drive a greater focus on responsible investing in New Zealand. Yeah,
I agree with you. And, from someone who's been in this game for well over 20 years, it's we look back 20 years ago, it was an absolute struggle to try and have a conversation about environmental compliance, like any environmental performance. So at least we're making some progress, and not a moment too soon. But Isabel, what are your sort of closing thoughts on terms of the opportunities going forward for responsible investing in New Zealand? And it is exciting, but also a little bit daunting. But what do you think?
Well, I mentioned the small community in New Zealand, and I think that's a really important part that we should remember. Because of that smaller community, we have got the ability to share knowledge, share resources, and also connect with each other, drive on partnerships. And even though we're based in New Zealand and may sometimes feel we are at the end of the world and we're not really feeling connected, we can use that to our advantage, because we're quite clued in on what is happening around the world. We're quite clued in on where we see ourselves as well. And we can make sure and contribute to that conversation, use what is being developed and use what is being utilized elsewhere to our advantage. and contribute to it in a sense of our learnings that we can build on that, sharing it back into the world. And I think this is where we've got an amazing opportunity that we should not forget because of that close connection and because it makes things much easier in knowing your neighbor, knowing your customers. Let's use that to our advantage and let's make sure that we don't forget that.
Yeah, and I think knowing your customers from a client and beneficiary point of view is one of the key learnings from the recent research that the FMA did, looking at consumers and their knowledge of responsible or ethical or indeed sustainable investing. Thanks to my wonderful panelists for speaking, and indeed thanks to Kylie from the CFA and Stuart for instigating and coming up with the idea for this webinar. So